You never forget the sound of a room turning against you, especially when that room holds your entire sense of belonging. It started with a laugh. Not mine, of course. Lana's. That laugh, sharp, crystalline, always half a beat too loud, pierced through the auditorium like a scalpel dipped in sugar. I was 14, standing under the weak overhead lights at St. Miriam's Middle School auditorium, half hoping no one would notice me, half hoping maybe, for once, someone might. I hadn't even made it halfway to the refreshment table when Lana's voice cracked through the murmuring crowd like a rifle shot laced with glitter. Clara, oh my God, did you forget to wear concealer again? You know the lighting here is brutal on your face. The way she said face made it sound like a punishment. Her friends, the beautiful, bronzed cheer squad clones she curated like accessories, giggled in unison. I wish I had flinched. I wish I had screamed. I wish I had disappeared. But what I did was worse. I froze. In that moment, I could feel the weight of every whispered comment our mother ever made about my skin, my weight, my potential. They didn't come as memories, they came as echoes, stacked like ghosts on top of each other. You have such a pretty smile when you sit up straight. Imagine how lovely your jawline would be if you lost 10 pounds. You should try using a little foundation, sweetheart, just to even things out. None of it was meant to hurt, I don't think. But neither was acid rain, it just happened, slowly, relentlessly, until one day, you looked around and realized nothing grew in your soil anymore. I didn't cry that night, not in front of Lana, not in front of the teachers or the smiling, clapping parents who probably thought she was just being playful. I waited until I was home, until the door clicked behind me and I had peeled off the dress Mom made me wear. It was a pale blue thing with cinched sleeves and an empire waist, for shape, she said. I buried my face in the pillow and screamed until my throat was raw. I stopped wearing dresses after that. I stopped speaking up in class. I stopped looking in mirrors, except when absolutely necessary. And, even then, I kept the lights dim. Lana, of course, didn't notice. Why would she? She was too busy curating her own mythos, student council, captain of the varsity cheer squad, dating upperclassmen like it was a job, and she was damn good at it. People loved Lana the way people love fireworks, loud, quick, a little dangerous, and only tolerable from a distance. And I was the shadow that followed her through hallways. The name they remembered second, if they remembered it at all. Oh, you're Lana's sister, right? A sentence that started strong and ended with disinterest. At home, the comparisons were never direct, but they were constant. Lana just has a natural confidence, Mom would muse while watching her pose for selfies in the kitchen. You should take notes, Clara. Dad would nod in silent agreement while hiding behind the evening news or a lukewarm beer. I didn't understand it at the time, but my mother's obsession with appearance wasn't vanity, it was currency. In our family, beauty wasn't about self-expression or pride, it was about survival. Love was dispensed based on perceived effort. And effort meant contouring cheekbones you didn't have and dressing a body you wished you could erase. One night, not long after the auditorium incident, I sat at the bathroom sink with a bottle of concealer in one hand and a trembling makeup sponge in the other. I was trying to follow Lana's tutorial, one she posted online, full of peppy tips and light-hearted mockery. Even if you're cursed with hormonal acne like some people I know, she'd chirped on camera, you can still fake it, till you make it. That was the first time I felt something deeper than embarrassment. It was rage. Not hot, not explosive, just steady and bitter, like ash in the back of your throat. From that night on, I began cataloging every humiliation like pressed flowers in a diary. The way Lana once accidentally posted an unflattering photo of me in a bikini. The way she borrowed my favorite sweater, stained it with foundation, then claimed it looked better on her anyway. The way Mom sighed when I refused dessert, muttering under her breath about how Clara always takes things too far. By 16, I had memorized the art of invisibility. My wardrobe shrunk to blacks and grays. My voice to a mumble. My dreams to afterthoughts. I buried myself in books, not stories, but manuals. Psychology. Behavioral science. Anything that could explain why love in our house always felt like a prize you had to win instead of something you were born worthy of. Still, I was kind. Because kindness was the only rebellion I had. I helped strangers pick up dropped books. I tutored classmates who forgot my name. I listened, really listened, when people spoke because I knew what it was like to speak into silence. But even kindness had its price. It made me a convenient target. A sponge. A container for other people's pain, so they wouldn't have to carry it themselves. Lana used to call me our family's emotional support animal behind closed doors. The worst part? Mom laughed. I remember once asking her, really asking, raw and trembling, why she never defended me. Why she never stopped Lana. She looked at me with eyes full of exasperation and said, because that's just how sisters are. You're too sensitive, Clara. And maybe I was. But being sensitive in a house like ours felt like standing barefoot in a hallway of broken glass. Every step forward bled. When I turned 17, I started keeping a journal. Not the pretty, ribbon-bound kind. A black leather thing, cheap and sturdy. In it, I wrote everything I couldn't say out loud. About how it felt to be a placeholder in your own life. About the way Lana's cruelty could gut me and still earn applause. About the way Mom's helpful suggestions made me feel like a renovation project she couldn't wait to show off. That journal became my mirror. The only one I trusted. There was one entry I wrote the night after Lana's 17th birthday party, an over-the-top rooftop affair with fairy lights and catered sushi. She wore a white mini dress and glitter eyeliner. I wore a smile so tight it cracked the moment I got home. I wrote, they only love you when you're something to show off. They love Lana because she sparkles, not because she's good. I could be a saint and still be invisible. I could scream and still be unheard. I closed that journal and cried until my nose bled. I didn't go to prom. I didn't apply to the same colleges as Lana. I didn't even tell my parents when I got into 2 decent universities out of state. I just packed. Quietly. On a Wednesday night in May, the week after graduation, I slid a note under Mom's bedroom door that said, I need to learn how to love myself somewhere you haven't broken me. I never looked back. Some people say transformation is a choice, but for me, it was more like a slow-burning compulsion, a relentless whisper that followed me across state lines, whispering that the only way forward was to erase what I once was. College didn't change me overnight. It wasn't one of those glitzy movie montages where the ugly duckling becomes the swan by senior year. No, for me, the metamorphosis was measured in semesters and sleepless nights, in therapy appointments booked 3 towns over so I wouldn't run into anyone who might recognize the hollowed girl I used to be. I majored in visual design, which felt both poetic and cruel. I was sculpting beauty for a living while silently negotiating with my own reflection every morning. I told myself it was art, that it had nothing to do with the layers I despised on my own face. But every assignment, every client brief about aesthetics and clean symmetry cut a little deeper than it should have. I spent hours studying facial structures, color theory, the psychology of shapes, and somewhere in that academic obsession, I began treating myself like one of my own projects. A prototype. A draft that required refining. The first thing I changed was my nose. I told people it was deviated septum surgery. Technically not a lie, but the real reason was etched in every cruel memory of Lana calling me bumpy face in middle school. I'd stared at that nose in the mirror so long it felt like an enemy I lived with. The morning after the bandages came off, I didn't cry. I just stared at my reflection and whispered, now maybe they'll shut up. The thing is, they were never talking anymore. Not really. Lana had stopped sending mocking texts years ago. My mother had stopped hinting at Weight Watchers meetings. But their voices lived inside me like squatters, never paying rent, never leaving. And even though the world outside seemed to soften, I couldn't unlearn the instinct to brace myself every time someone looked at me too long. Ethan came into my life during my final year of college in a way that felt like something too gentle to be real. He wasn't like anyone I'd known before. Quiet in a way that didn't feel like absence. Present in a way that didn't feel like performance. He was a philosophy major who liked to ask questions he never expected answers to. He noticed things not in the way you'd think, not in that shallow, male gaze of appraisal, but in the way that made you feel like your silences had textures worth touching. I remember the first time he looked at me like I wasn't wearing armor. We were on a library floor nobody used, seated across from each other in two ancient chairs with cracking full leather arms. He asked, very softly, "What do you think you'd look like if you hadn't been taught to hate your face?" That moment was like being punched in the soul. I didn't answer. I think I might have smiled, that broken half-smile that feels like an apology, and I changed the subject to something safe like whether Camus would have hated Twitter. Ethan never pushed. He never asked about the creams lining my bathroom counter, like soldiers preparing for war. He never commented on the way I avoided photos or kept my bedroom lighting dim. He didn't flinch when I told him I'd rather go to the dermatologist than go out drinking. He made space for my rituals without glorifying them. That was the cruelest part of healing. It makes you soft for a while, until you remember softness is still a risk. By the time I turned 26, my cheekbones were sharper, my skin smooth from years of peels and retinoids, my jaw realigned after a procedure that left me on smoothies for 6 weeks. My eyes looked larger from the microblepharoplasty, but I still avoided eye contact with myself on bad days. Every improvement made me more visible to strangers and more invisible to my family. Lana once commented on a photo Ethan posted, something casual but venom-laced. "Looking good, sis. Didn't recognize you for a sec, thought Ethan got a new girlfriend." It was a joke. It always was. The kind you're not supposed to be mad about. The kind that makes people laugh, but leaves your stomach in knots long after the likes stop rolling in. That summer, my parents planned a surprise family vacation, some beachside rental meant to be a bonding opportunity. I went because Ethan wanted to understand more about where I came from. I told him later I should have warned him better. The house was all white driftwood decor and passive-aggressive tension. Lana brought a new boyfriend, tall, loud, with a Rolex tan and a habit of staring too long at women in swimsuits. Ethan kept his distance. He didn't drink much, but he poured wine into my glass with quiet regularity. On the second day, as we sat around the patio watching the sunset like some dysfunctional cult, Lana turned to Ethan and tilted her head in that way she does when she wants to sound innocent while slitting your throat. "So, Ethan," she said, "do you ever wonder what Clara really looked like before all this?" She waved her hand at me like I was an exhibit in a museum. He blinked slowly, as if translating her cruelty into a dialect he didn't speak. "She looks like herself," he said, so calmly that for a second, I believed him. But I laughed. Loudly. Too loudly. The kind of laugh that sounds nothing like joy. The kind that tastes like blood and bile and broken mirrors. 15 minutes later, I was in the upstairs bathroom, kneeling in front of a porcelain god I thought I'd abandoned in high school. I emptied my stomach with the kind of violence that felt both familiar and foreign. I looked at my face in the toilet water before flushing. The worst part wasn't what Lana said. It wasn't even that she said it in front of Ethan. It was that part of me agreed with her. After that trip, I didn't speak to her for 6 months. I didn't return my mother's texts. I ignored my father's voicemail where he muttered that I was being overly dramatic again and should just let Lana be Lana. But during that silence, I built. I took on more freelance clients, designed logos for startups, ran branding for boutiques. I poured myself into work the way some people pour themselves into alcohol, just another way to stay numb. I filled my calendar with conferences and virtual panels, adding credentials to a LinkedIn profile I never checked but updated religiously. My therapist called it productive dissociation. I called it finally mattering, but Ethan saw the cracks. He saw the way I worked until I couldn't sleep. The way I'd cancel plans if a single blemish appeared. The way I'd smile for him, but never let him see me without eyeliner. "You don't have to be perfect with me," he said once, voice low, warm, infuriatingly sincere. And I snapped. "Don't say that like it's romantic. You think I'm trying to be perfect for you? This isn't about you, Ethan. This is survival." He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just sat there with that maddening empathy, like someone watching a wounded animal bite the hand that fed it. Later, I cried into his shirt and told him about the auditorium when I was 14. About the makeup tutorials and the backhanded compliments and the years of feeling like my face was a public domain people had the right to comment on. I told him everything, except the part where I still didn't believe I deserved to be loved without makeup. He held me like he was trying to rearrange my bones into something sacred. But even he couldn't make the mirror kinder. The irony was, the more beautiful I became by society's standards, the more grotesque I felt inside. Compliments felt like landmines. Every "you look amazing" sounded like you finally fixed what was wrong. Every "you're glowing" felt like an indictment of who I used to be. I had engineered my exterior to reflect strength, but the scaffolding inside me was rusted with grief. One night, after another corporate branding job fell through, and I'd cried so hard my contacts dried out, I wrote Lana a letter. Not to send. Just to write. I wrote, "You win. You always win. But I hope someday you understand what it costs to wear a mask so long it fuses to your skin. I hope someday you realize that cruelty dressed up as just joking still leaves scars. You made me fight for visibility, and now I can't stop performing even when no one's watching. Even when I'm alone." I didn't sign it. I tucked it into the back of my journal, next to the last photo I kept of me before the surgeries. A girl with round cheeks and hopeful eyes and acne scars like constellations. I stared at her for a long time. She didn't look broken. She looked unfinished. The next morning, I scheduled a follow-up therapy session. Not because I wanted to fix everything, just because I wanted to remember who I was before the war. There are moments in a woman's life when everything slows to the stillness of a photograph, just one frame suspended in the haze of memory, and for me, that moment began the morning I slipped into my wedding dress. It wasn't couture. It wasn't dramatic. It was satin, cream, soft, structured, custom-fitted to my body by a woman who had once called my hips elegantly defiant. And for once, I didn't flinch at the mirror. I didn't whisper insults. I just stood there, breathing deeply, hands against my stomach, staring at the reflection of someone who had climbed her way out of invisibility one brutal, blood-tinged rung at a time. Ethan had picked the venue. An old art museum repurposed into a garden hall with vaulted ceilings and skylights that poured honey-colored sunlight over every marble curve. I remember walking through it with him a year before, his fingers lightly brushing mine, his voice steady when he said, "This is the kind of place you deserve to be seen." Now, as I stood in the bridal suite with my hands trembling slightly against the lace work veil, I thought about all the versions of me that had led to this altar, the quiet child, the hardened teen, the sculpted adult. I thought about how Ethan saw all of them not as failed drafts, but as a whole arc of strength carved from pain. There had been tension about inviting Lana. Of course there had. Every instinct in me screamed that she would twist this day like she twisted everything sacred. But Ethan had said something that stopped me cold. If you spend your life dodging landmines, you'll never stand still long enough to plant anything. So I invited her. I even seated her at a table close enough to be seen, far enough not to disrupt. Or so I thought. The ceremony was nearly ethereal. I walked down the aisle to strings swelling behind me, sunlight pouring through the skylight like it had been summoned. Ethan's eyes never left mine, not even for a second. I remember the way his mouth twitched slightly upward when he saw me, that smile like armor, that breath he always held when overwhelmed with love. We said our vows. He cried first. I followed. We kissed to the sound of applause. There were no cell phones, no distractions, just the echo of promises in a hall filled with people who believed in beginnings. The reception began with laughter, cocktails, and the quiet murmur of mingled joy. I floated through it all like someone whose body had finally caught up to her spirit. Every compliment rolled off me without skepticism, without reflexive deflection. For the first time in my life, I believed them. When it was time for the speech, I didn't hesitate. I walked to the mic barefoot, the heels had long since been kicked off, and I looked out into a sea of faces that shimmered like memories, like fragments of every broken thing I had pieced back together. I was never the girl who believed in fairy tales, I began, voice strong, unwavering. Not because I didn't want to, but because I learned early that the mirror rarely offers kindness unless you teach it to. There were nods, a soft collective exhale. I've rebuilt myself more times than I can count, not for vanity, not for perfection, but for peace. And somewhere in that mess of trial and error, pain and persistence, I met someone who didn't ask me to explain. He just saw me, and not the version I performed, but the quiet, unpolished ache beneath. Ethan, you didn't fix me. You didn't need to. You just held space while I learned how to stop apologizing for my own skin. There was silence. Then, slowly, the kind of applause that isn't just polite, but reverent. And that's when it happened. A laugh. Sharp. Familiar. Poisonous. Sorry, Lana said, standing from her seat like she was taking the stage at a club roast. I mean, this speech is beautiful and all, but how many plastic surgeries are we pretending didn't happen? There was a beat. One of those unbearable beats where sound vanishes and time falters. Then the screen behind me, meant to play a soft montage of our engagement photos, suddenly flickered. Old photos. Not just old, cruel. My worst. The acne-riddled yearbook photo from 8th grade. The overweight high school dance picture where I wore a borrowed dress 2 sizes too small. Candid shots I never knew existed, some that I'd buried so deep even I had forgotten them. Someone hurt, no doubt, had replaced the slideshow. My stomach dropped through the floor. Let's play a game, Lana chirped into the second mic she'd somehow acquired. How many surgeries do you think it took to get from that? She pointed to the horror show behind me, to this radiant goddess before us. The number 7 rang out from a voice I didn't recognize. Another laughed. There was nervous shifting. Half the room was appalled. The other half didn't know whether to look at me or the screen. I was frozen. My hands clutched the mic like a lifeline. My breath came shallow. My eyes burned. But before I could speak, before I could run, cry, or combust, a voice, deep and deliberate, cut through the chaos. Enough. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't my father. It was Richard. Ethan's father. A man of few words, silver-haired, suit pressed like iron, eyes that had seen war and survived marriages with more venom than Lana could ever manufacture. He rose from his table with the kind of slow, deliberate grace that silences entire ballrooms. Walked with the patience of someone who knew the precise weight of a moment. And without asking, without faltering, he took the mic from my trembling hand. "Young lady," he said, turning to Lana, "you have made a terrible mistake." The room stilled. I've watched Clara from a distance for years now. Not because she demanded attention, not because she performed, but because she radiates something far rarer than beauty. She radiates truth earned from torment and grace learned through fire. Lana scoffed, but the silence swallowed her. You want to mock her for choosing to reclaim her reflection? You want to diminish her for correcting the damage others inflicted? Then understand this. Your cruelty is not clever. It's cowardice wrapped in sequins. There was a murmur, then stillness again. Richard continued. Let me be clear. This woman, he gestured to me, his voice firm, is not the sum of her surgeries, or her scars, or her silence. She is the embodiment of what it means to transform, not to please others, but to rescue yourself from a history written by those too blind to see. He turned to the guests. And if any of you found humor in what just occurred, if any of you laughed, or smirked, or felt smug in the knowledge of someone else's pain, I suggest you leave now. Because the only people welcome at this table are those who understand that strength looks like surviving a room full of knives and choosing to set them down rather than throw them back. No one moved. Not even Lana. Richard handed me the mic again. His eyes, piercing and proud, held mine. "You don't have to say anything, Clara," he said, voice softer now. "But if you do, say it for yourself. Not for them." I didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the center of the room and reached behind the screen. One by one, I unplugged every cable. The slideshow went dark. The room fell into the kind of silence that feels like thunder paused. I turned back, picked up the mic. "I have had 7 surgeries," I said, voice cracking but loud. "And each one was a stitch in the tapestry of reclaiming the body that the world told me to hate. Each procedure was not a betrayal of who I was, but a rescue mission for the woman buried under layers of shame I never asked for." Lana opened her mouth. I didn't give her the mic. "You don't get to define me anymore," I said. "You never did. You were just louder." Then I turned to Ethan. His eyes shone. He didn't look away. "And you," I said, "have seen me before and after, in all states of light and shadow. And still, you stayed. That's what matters." I dropped the mic. Not for effect. For closure. The applause wasn't immediate. But when it came, it wasn't polite. It was raw. It was furious. It was sacred. Lana left without finishing her wine. She didn't speak to me again. And I danced. I danced with Ethan beneath the same skylight that had bathed our vows in gold. I danced with Richard, who held me like a daughter. I danced with every version of myself I had ever buried, inviting them, finally, into the light. There's a moment that comes after public humiliation, an eerie, echoing silence that sets in once the clapping stops and the candles flicker out. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, but paralyzing. Like someone pressed pause on your life just as you were about to exhale. That silence was all I could hear when I woke up the morning after the wedding. I wasn't in our bed. I was on the floor beside it, curled in the crumpled shadow of my wedding gown, which still hung limp from the closet door like a ghost I didn't ask to summon. My phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand, screen glowing with names I hadn't seen in years. Some sent emojis. Others sent links. Someone had filmed it, of course they had. The entire thing. The speech, the ambush, the slideshow of shame, the mic drop, the slow applause. Within 12 hours, it was on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, even Reddit under a thread titled, "Bride claps back after sister tries to ruin wedding, you won't believe her response." Over 2 million views by noon. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen with a numb kind of horror, watching strangers dissect my pain like it was a TV plot twist. Some were compassionate, defending me like loyal warriors on a battlefield I never asked to be drafted into. Others called me overdramatic, fake, surgery-obsessed, or worse, insecure and desperate for attention. The internet doesn't just react, it autopsies you while you're still breathing. The first phone call came from my mother. She didn't even say hello, just sighed heavily into the phone like she was the one carrying grief. "Well," she began, "Lana went too far this time." I told her that. It was tasteless, I agree. I said nothing. Not yet. "But, sweetheart," she added, her voice dipping into that unbearable mix of concern and condescension, "you really shouldn't have kept all of this a secret. People were bound to find out eventually." There it was. The twist. The suggestion that this wasn't about cruelty, but about my concealment. The implication that somehow I'd invited the shame by not offering it first. "Are you saying this is my fault?" I asked, the edge of my voice sharp enough to cut steel. "No," she rushed, then paused, then softened. "But honesty prevents a lot of misunderstandings. If you'd just been open about what you've done." "What I've done?" I repeated, my voice rising. Like I committed a crime? "All I'm saying is maybe if you hadn't been so guarded, Lana wouldn't have felt like." "I don't give a damn what Lana felt," I snapped. "She humiliated me, Mom. On my wedding day. In front of everyone. And instead of defending me, you're asking me to understand her. The line was silent for a moment. She's your sister, she said finally. And family. Family doesn't weaponize your past just to stay relevant, I said, my voice steady now, I see. Family doesn't call it honesty when it's really just envy with lipstick on. I hung up before she could reply. The next few days blurred together in a mix of isolation and rage. I ignored the phone. I canceled interviews. I turned down the sympathetic podcast offers. I rejected every reporter who wanted to amplify my voice. I didn't want amplification. I wanted silence. Not the hollow silence from the internet, but a deeper one, the kind that lets you hear your own heartbeat again after someone's tried to silence it with a megaphone. Ethan tried. God, he tried. He brought tea. He cooked. He sat quietly in the corner of the room, sometimes just reading, sometimes just breathing, as if trying to prove that presence didn't always require words. But I was drifting. When he finally confronted me, it wasn't with anger. It was with pain. You're shutting me out, he said one night, after I'd slept in the guest room for the third time. I need space, I replied, not meeting his eyes. You keep saying that, Clara, he said. But what you really mean is you need distance, from me, from this marriage, from everything that scares you about being seen. I didn't respond. He exhaled, deeply. Nothing about you is fake, he said quietly. Not your face. Not your fight. Not your silence. The only thing fake was the belief that you ever had to carry all that pain alone. That was when I broke. Not with tears, but with fury. Don't you dare tell me how I feel, I hissed, standing, hands clenched. Don't you dare act like this is about insecurity. I have spent years rebuilding myself from ashes, from mockery, from the absolute annihilation of my sense of self. You think love fixes that? You think your calm voice and warm arms are enough to rewrite 25 years of emotional landmines? He didn't flinch. I think love helps, he said. But only if you let it in. I didn't sleep at home that night. I checked into a hotel across town. Told the front desk my name was something else. I needed to be nobody for a little while. But isolation wasn't healing. It was just an echo chamber where my own guilt grew louder. The next day, I drove to Lana's. She opened the door with that same smirk she's worn since she was 12. The kind that always felt like it knew something you didn't. The kind that makes you feel small, even when you know better. I was wondering how long it'd take, she said, sipping iced coffee. Come to yell? Or to thank me for the viral fame? I came, I said, walking past her into the living room, to tell you that you no longer exist to me. She scoffed, sitting down on the armrest of the couch, legs crossed like a pageant queen at a press conference. Oh, please. You act like this was some big betrayal. I thought it was funny. People should know the truth. You were always pretending. That did it. Pretending. I repeated, the laugh that escaped my throat low, bitter. You want to talk about pretending, Lana? Let's talk about how you pretended to care every time you called me sensitive, instead of human. Let's talk about how you cloaked your cruelty in sarcasm and called it sisterly teasing. Let's talk about how you made our house a battlefield where my worth was measured by how invisible I could be. Her smile faltered. Just a crack. But it was enough. You don't get to rewrite this, I said, stepping closer. You don't get to be the victim of my silence. You were never innocent. You were just louder. And people like you? You rely on silence to keep your throne. Clara. No. You don't get to say my name like it belongs to you. She stood now, face flushed. I didn't mean for it to blow up like that. God, I don't know. I was drunk. It was a joke. I nodded slowly. A joke. That's what you call it when you need to dehumanize someone and still sleep at night. She crossed her arms. You think you're so righteous now, just because some strangers defended you online? This isn't about them, I said. It's about me. And the fact that I'm done pretending your love is worth earning. She flinched at that. Maybe because it was the first time I'd said it out loud. I spent 20 years chasing your approval like it was a paycheck, I continued. And every time I got close, you moved the finish line. You mocked. You minimized. You stole every safe space I tried to build. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with anger. She was losing control, and that terrified her more than anything else. I don't hate you, Lana, I said, walking to the door. But I refuse to let you narrate my story anymore. I left without waiting for a response. That night, I returned home. Ethan was in the kitchen, reading again. He looked up, guarded. I'm not going to apologize for needing space, I said softly. You don't have to, he replied. I'm just glad you came back. I visited Lana. He nodded once. And? I told her I'm done. He walked over slowly, took my hand. You were always allowed to be done, he said. I just needed you to believe it. We didn't talk more after that. We didn't need to. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet reclaiming of breath, of choice, of self. And sometimes it's standing in your kitchen, holding the hand of a man who never asked you to be anything other than whole, even when you arrived in pieces. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes not with fanfare or applause, but in the soft decisions no one else notices you make. It's not the dramatic goodbye or the fiery confrontation. It's what happens after. It's what happens when you choose not to answer the phone. When you stop checking to see if they've watched your stories. When the ache dulls into a kind of calm you never thought you'd earn. Months had passed since the wedding. Enough time for the internet to move on, for the threads to close, for the jokes to die. Enough time for the world to forget, even if I hadn't. The silence that followed wasn't painful. It was relief. Like finally exhaling after holding your breath through a minefield of expectations. The last message Lana ever sent me was a single line. No apology. No explanation. Just, you really think you're better than us now? I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. It sits in my phone like a fossil, undisturbed, irrelevant, a relic from a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. After everything, Ethan and I moved. Not far enough to vanish, but far enough to breathe. A small town tucked against the edge of a lake, not even on most maps, where people still wave from their porches and no one asks about your past unless you offer it. It was his hometown. A place filled with quiet woods and a school that still used chalkboards. The day we unpacked the last box, I stood on our back porch and watched the wind ripple across the water. And for the first time in years, my body didn't brace for someone's judgment. My breath didn't catch waiting for a cruel remark. It was just me, the air, and the sound of leaves rustling like they were applauding without hands. I started teaching again. Not full-time, not in a formal school. It was a weekend program at a local community center, mostly teen girls, some troubled, some just quiet, all of them carrying weight they didn't know how to name. I called the course Mirrors and Meaning, a strange little blend of art therapy and storytelling that I crafted from my own scars. We didn't talk about beauty. Not directly. We talked about power. About expression. About how creating something from nothing was an act of rebellion in a world that teaches girls to shrink. One girl, Maya, drew herself as a shadow with eyes too large and hands too small. This is how I feel when my mom says I'm dramatic, she told me. Another, Jules, painted a forest made entirely of broken glass trees. You can still walk through it, she said. You just have to bleed. I didn't correct them. I didn't tell them to paint something hopeful. I let them name their pain, frame it, color it with their own defiance. That was the whole point. And then one weekend, 6 months after the move, one of the girls asked if I had ever been embarrassed in front of everyone. I paused, took a breath, and for the first time since that day, I said yes. I brought in a projector the following Saturday. I told them we were doing something different. I said, today we're going to talk about the difference between shame and truth. I played the wedding clip. All of it. I stood at the side while they watched. The laughter. The humiliation. The speech. Richard's voice cutting through the cruelty like thunder. My mic drop. The applause. When it ended, No one clapped. Instead, one girl, Sierra, age 15, black eyeliner drawn like armor, whispered, "That was messed up." I nodded. Yes, it was. Then another asked, "How did you not break?" I looked at them, these fragile, fire-filled, curious creatures, and I answered honestly. I did, I said. But breaking doesn't mean you're ruined. Sometimes it means you finally have enough pieces to build something stronger. They stared at me, silent. And healing, I added, isn't about erasing what happened. It's about choosing peace over needing someone else to admit they were wrong. I left the video in our archive. A teaching tool. Not a warning. A mirror. Not everyone's reflection looked like mine, but the message was universal. Your voice matters more than anyone's version of you. The next week, Maya gave me a drawing. It was me, standing in front of a cracked mirror, holding a paintbrush instead of a mic. Behind me, a small shadow, her, I think, watching with wide eyes. I pinned it up above my desk. No frame. Just tape and truth. Life didn't become perfect. There were days I still caught myself scrutinizing every angle of my face in the bathroom mirror. Days I turned off the lights before undressing, even with Ethan in the next room. Days when I saw a girl from the past staring back at me and wondered how much of her still lived in my bones. But those days passed more quickly now. I could let them pass. Ethan and I planted a garden behind the house. Tomatoes, mostly. I told him I liked watching things grow slowly. He told me I was the bravest person he knew. I believed him. Sometimes at night, I sit by the lake with a mug of tea and no makeup, wrapped in a blanket that smells like cedar and home. I listen to the wind. I listen to myself. And I think about the long road from shame to silence to voice. I don't miss Lana. I don't need closure. Not every wound requires a witness to heal. I have Ethan. I have the girls. I have my breath, steady and full. And one morning, as the sun streamed through the east window, I stood in front of the mirror, not to fix, not to inspect, not to adjust. I stood there to tape up another drawing. It was a stick figure, hand-drawn in glitter pen, labeled Miss Clara, Warrior Queen. It didn't look anything like me, but somehow it was the truest portrait I'd ever received. I smiled. Not everything has healed, but I no longer need to hide.